studios in New York City. This is Charlie Rose.
Tonight we begin with a look at the growing strain on American men and women serving around the world. Last week marked a moment of reckoning for forces in Afghanistan when Staff Sergeant Robert Bales was accused of killing 16 civilians in Kandahar. He joined the Army in 2001, shortly after the September 11th attacks. He has since been deployed 4 times, serving 3 tours in Iraq and most recently in Afghanistan. The killings drew attention to the increasing physical and psychological stress put on American soldiers as the United States marks its 10th year in Afghanistan. Joining me now from St. Louis is Greiten. He is a former Navy SEAL who has served both in Iraq and Afghanistan. With me in New York, Paul Rieckhoff. He served as an Army First Lieutenant in Iraq and is the founder of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. I am pleased to have them on this program, and we want to make this very important point. There is no, in this conversation, understanding or a link to what Sergeant Bales may have done or what may have caused him to do what he has been accused of. This is a conversation about the strain on American men and women fighting around the globe and what it is that may be important to understand about that strain from 2 people who understand the military and who have proudly served and know so many people that have served with them who have not had any kind of circumstances other than heroic actions. So I'm pleased to have a conversation that is not specific but is connected to stresses that may very well go with a number of tours in battle. So I began with Greiten in St. Louis. Tell me how you assess this question of strain on American forces, notwithstanding the particular cases and the particular circumstances of Sergeant Bales.
Well, Charlie, no question there's been major strain on American forces over the course of the past 10 years. And it's strained because of multiple combat deployments, and it's strained not just on those forces, but also on their families. When you think about the fact that over the course of the past 10 years, it's less than 1% of all Americans have served in Iraq and Afghanistan, you recognize that it's a very small percentage of the population that's carrying a big burden for the entire country.
And what is the toll on them? Those brave men and women who are serving time after time, tour after tour.
It's unprecedented, Charlie. We've never had such a small group of people do so much for so long. It's been 10 years, but it's only been 2.4 million people. So it's a very small segment, and an unprecedented small segment. Compare that to 12% during World War II. A time in Vietnam where we had a draft and everyone had a personal connection. So the same group of people continue to deploy over and over again. More than 500,000 have been deployed more than once. Over 100,000 have been deployed 3 times or more. So it's a churn that's going on here, and that does have a tremendous impact on their emotional well-being, their psychological well-being, their spiritual well-being. And I don't think we'll fully appreciate the long-term effects and the costs for many decades, but they will be substantial. I think it's important to note, as you did, that we don't jump to stereotypes. I think it was very important the way you led off this segment, that we don't blanket all of our troops because of this rogue behavior, this murderous rampage of one guy who doesn't represent the courage and the determination and the fortitude of so many people who've served honorably. This is a terrible moment, but it is an isolated incident, and it's not representative of so many millions of men and women who've done so much for so long. So we want people to push back against those preconceived stereotypes. Even here in New York, the New York Daily News had a headline last week that said "Psycho Sergeant." We've got to take a deep breath here and understand the issues and unpack them, because right now we don't know what caused this, but if it starts a larger conversation about the strains on our military, then that's a good thing, and it's about time. It's really overdue.
The Army is clearly aware of this, and the military is clearly aware of this. Are they taking steps already, in a sense, to deal with the issue of being overstretched in terms of commitments overseas?
They are, and I think the drawdown in Iraq will lessen the burden, but we're still facing 10 years of war. I think specifically around some of the issues that have been brought up, traumatic brain injury care and understanding and treatment has come a long way, but mental health screenings still have a long way to go. IAVA and other groups pushed hard in 2009 and 2010 for the Defense Authorization Bill to cover mandatory mental health screenings before and after deployments. But we only had 100% completion last year. So there are still holes, there are still gaps, and really it does come down to those small unit commanders to make sure they understand their people, they understand their needs, and they're raising a flag if necessary.
Without going again to the specific cases of motivation and psychology that we cannot understand at this point, what do you notice about his case that jumped out to you?
Well, you know, when I look at a case like that, Charlie, I compare it to the cases of all of the veterans who I know, who I served with, who, you know, were overseas when their kids were diagnosed with Down syndrome, who were overseas when their houses were broken into, who were overseas when their mortgage turned upside down. And one of the things that you recognize, it's very similar about this case, is just when service members deploy, family life goes on and their community life goes on. And those stresses and those strains from being separated can affect anybody when they're overseas. And again, while we don't know about what's happened in this specific case, it's certainly the case that in all of these deployments, people have a family life that continues while they're serving their country overseas.
What have we noticed between brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder?
They affect hundreds of thousands of folks. As many as 20% of troops coming home may have a traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress disorder. We know that it's a relatively new injury, especially with roadside bombs that cause concussive blasts that can, you know, ring your bell and have what we call an invisible injury that may not reveal itself until years later. A guy on our staff, Nick Colgan, was a medic in the 82nd Airborne. Great guy, highly motivated, came home with a brain injury and didn't know it until he had been home for months and started to have challenges with his vision and memory. So we do know that the screening is still not adequate. The VA did not start screening for traumatic brain injury until a number of years into the war, and we're still unpacking. A lot of the best research has come from car crashes and football. And we do know one thing, that even if someone has a traumatic brain injury, it doesn't necessarily cause you to have a premeditated murderous rampage. You know, and that's some of the connections that were made early that we really need to urge people to have caution about.
Eric, what would you add to that?
You know, one of the things I'd say, Charlie, we just did a study with Washington University on the Mission Continues Fellows. So these are our fellows, they're veterans who came back and we put into a program at the Mission Continues where they started to serve again. Over 60% of them in this program had post-traumatic stress disorder. Over 50% had traumatic brain injury. I think the encouraging news is that through the fellowship program, as they got reintegrated into their community, as they were supported by mentors, as community groups came around them to support them, we found that by the end of a 6-month fellowship, 86% of them were on their way to full-time employment, full-time education, and they had an ongoing role as citizen leaders in the community. So the point is that, yes, traumatic brain injury is real. Post-traumatic stress disorder is real. We have to understand it, and we also have to recognize that these are challenges which can be overcome and which thousands of veterans today are in the process of overcoming with the support of organizations here at home.
Do you believe that this massacre that took place in Afghanistan will serve as a catalyst for change?
I hope so. It should be a wake-up call for all Americans to just better understand our community. I think Eric touched on it earlier, but less than 1/2% of the American population has served, so most folks don't know us. And I think that causes rushes to stereotypes. It causes some paralysis around what to do. But we really want to educate people about the issues facing our community and give them on-ramps and ways to help. And we at IAVA frame it in 4 basic categories of what folks need coming home. It's healthcare, it's education, it's employment, and it's community. And the last one is sometimes the most important. Because of that isolation, they need to be around other veterans. They need to be around other family members who know where they're coming from, but they also need to come home to supportive civilian communities who can action against those issues. Unemployment is a huge challenge facing our members right now. In IAVA, we see about a 17% unemployment rate. That should be unacceptable for everyone. And we want folks to think about these veterans not just as charity cases, but as an investment. We can go on to build a new greatest generation who can lead us in business and help turn around our economy, but they need opportunities and they need support.
So, Eric, what about people who are on the front lines of the battle, who may very well be feeling certain kinds of pressures and may be ready to erupt in one way or the other? Is there a monitoring process?
We've come a long way in that regard, Charlie, and I think every small unit commander who served in Iraq or Afghanistan would tell you that they want people who are on their team to talk with the people around them, share whatever is ailing them, whether it's a physical challenge, emotional challenge, something happening at home, if it's a psychological challenge. As a small unit commander in the field, you're responsible for the physical, emotional, psychological fitness of everybody who's on your unit. And I think we've come a long way recognizing that warriors do face strain, they do face hardship, and that what we have to do as a community of warriors is come together, pull together, support each other through that so that we can all do our mission with honor on the battlefield.
Regardless, again, apart from this particular incident, we've had a series of other kinds of incidents over there having to do with the burning of the Koran and other kinds of things like that.
Right.
What is that? Is that a failure of understanding culture, or what is it a failure of?
I think it's a failure of leadership, and it's a failure of accountability at the individual level. You know, ultimately, one thing we understand in the military is every individual is responsible for their actions. And now, more than ever, in this kind of a combat environment, your behavior is reflective of over 300 million Americans. You know, that's what I told my soldiers when we deployed to Iraq, and soldiers do understand that. So the cultural understanding has come a long way. I think the small unit commanders have gotten a better understanding of the Middle East. We still have a long way to go, but it always comes down to individual accountability and then leadership command climate. There is a system of checks and balances in place here. And if this guy, you know, snuck out in the middle of the night and went on this rampage, there were probably breakdowns along the way in security and leadership. And that's why we really need the investigation to run its course. And I trust in the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I trust in the military process to go through this thoughtfully and thoroughly.
Just to follow on to Paul's point, you know, one of the things that we always said to everybody who is on the battlefield is that you're wearing the flag of the United States on your shoulder. And every single person who you interact with is going to view your actions through the lens of what America does. And so it's essential that at an individual level, at a small unit level, that we take responsibility for what happens. And while we're taking responsibility for what happens, recognize that we're representing the values of the United States of America. This hurts no one more than the United States military. You have hundreds of thousands of people who are deployed right now who are in tremendously difficult situations, and they serve every single day with honor. And when an incident like this comes up, it's really a tremendous blow to them.
Eric, thank you very much. Paul, good to see you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the time.
We'll be right back.
Pleasure, Charlie.
Thank you.